Emily, what kind of day is it? It's a great day to be a Mustang. All right, here's your prompt. Why would a poem choose to write in fixed form versus free verse? So this is a little bit of a vocab review from the stuff we talked about last time. And if you were a poet, which one would you want to write in and why? So you're talking to a neighbor about this one. Okay. All right. So take out your poetry packets. You're going to read your chosen poem again. Are you still loving your chosen poem after reading it this many times? Yeah. Are you loving it more and more? That's the goal, at least. Okay, so for your chosen poem this time, last time we talked a lot about setting with that Derek Walcott poem about going into the woods. We're going to return to that here in a second, but we talked about how it's building setting and how it's like creating this shift in the way that we feel about setting. So I want you to read your chosen poem for setting now. Some of them, it's really obvious. They really create, like they use like a lot of imagery to create this sense of setting. Others, it's going to be more of an implied setting. So see what you can say and take notes on your page about the setting of your chosen poem. I'll give you 5 minutes to think about that. All right. Find some interesting things to say about setting in your poem. Like I said, some of them are going to be a little bit easier to write about that particular aspect than others, but it's an important thing to consider. All right, let's open back up to Derek Walcott's, that same poem we were looking at last time. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yes, I do want to do that. Give you a vocab afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to read the poem to you again because it's been 2 days. So let's remember the particulars of it. Unless someone else wants to take a turn reading, would anyone like to read the poem? With the frenzy of an old snake shedding its skin, the speckled road, scored with ruts, smelling of mold, twisted on itself and re-entered the forest where the Dasheen leaves thicken and folk stories begin. Sunset would threaten us as we climbed closer to her house up the asphalt hill road, whose yam vines wrangled over gutters with the dark reek of moss, the shutters closing like the eyelids of that mimosa called Tea Marie. Then, lucent as paper lanterns, lamplight glowed through the ribs, house after house. There was her own lamp at the black twist of the path. There's childhood and there's childhood's aftermath. She began to remember the minute of the fireflies, to the sound of pipe water banging in kerosene tins, stories she told to my brother and myself. Her leaves were the libraries of the Caribbean, the luck that was ours, those fragrant origins. Her head was magnificent, Sidney. In the gully of her voice, shadows stood up and walked. Her voice travels my shelves. She was the lamplight in the stare of two mesmerized boys still joined in one shadow, indivisible twins. Okay, this was a prompt on the actual AP test, so I have sample essays that we can look at to see how they did. But first, there's a scoring guide. So the AP test now is scored on a 1 through 6 scale, and I'll show you the rubric for that maybe next time. But it used to be, up until last year, it used to be scored on a 9-point scale. And the scores usually end up lining up anyway. So it's helpful to look at what this 9-point scale looks like, because usually the essays that are getting 6s would have gotten 8s or 9s. The essays that are getting 5s would have gotten 7 or 6s, and it kind of like translates that way. So let's see the 8 through 9. It says, these essays offer a persuasive discussion of the speaker's recollection and a persuasive analysis of Walcott's use of poetic devices to convey the significance of the experience. So basically, these essays do what the prompt asks you to do. These essays offer a range of interpretations. They provide a convincing discussion of the recollection and a convincing analysis of Walcott's use of poetic devices to convey the significance of the experience. They demonstrate consistent and effective control over the elements of composition in language appropriate to the analysis of poetry. So that's where they are looking at to see, like, do they have a thesis statement, somewhere in the intro, usually at the end of the intro. Are they connecting their ideas together with transitions? Is their grammar appropriate? That kind of stuff. Their textual references are apt and specific. That's kind of code for saying they use direct textual quotes, not just like talking about the plot or the characters. And though they may not be error-free, they do recognize this is the first draft. These essays are perceptive in their analysis and demonstrate writing that is clear and sophisticated. And in the case of a 9 essay, especially persuasive. So this is an essay that the graders are kind of like wowed by the fact that someone could have written this as a first draft. Just like, oh my gosh, this kid like knew this poem so well right off the bat. They're looking to see that you are using multiple pieces of evidence in an 8 or a 9 essay. So when you say something like the beginning has a dark and gloomy tone to it, you don't just focus on the snake, but you give like 3 pieces of evidence that support that. So they're looking that you can create, like you can find patterns in the poem and patterns in the way that the language is developed. So if there's enjambment, you're talking about either a really significant moment of enjambment or multiple instances of enjambment to show that it's a pattern. All right, so that's an 8 or 9 essay. Let's look down at the 3 to 4 essay, because a lot of them are kind of in that range. It says these lower half essays fail to offer an adequate analysis of the poem. The analysis may be partial, unconvincing, or irrelevant. That's a mean word, but that just means that sometimes like it's a wrong reading. Like a lot of times for my students, and I think for a lot of students, it's like taking the analysis too far and saying like, oh, this is actually a poem about, 1950s Berlin, and like just go, and they might provide like tons of evidence for that, but it's just like an incorrect reading of the poem. Or it may ignore the speaker's recollection or the analysis of Walcott's use of poetic devices to convey the significance of the experience. So these lower range of essays aren't using direct evidence that much, or if they are, they're not connecting the direct evidence to the theme, and they're just saying, okay, there's lots of assonance, and now let me tell you more about what's happening in the poem, but they don't show how the assonance is creating the nostalgia or whatever. Evidence from the poem may be slight or misconstrued, or the essays may rely on paraphrase only. The writing often demonstrates a lack of control over the conventions of composition, inadequate development of ideas, accumulation of errors, or a focus that is unclear, inconsistent, or repetitive. Essays scored a 3 may contain significant misreading or demonstrate inept writing. So I've always heard that even if it's the most amazing essay ever, like it's such good transitions, the structure's amazing, you have great analysis, if you misconstrue the poem, it can't get higher than a 4. So for our on a 6-point scale, I think it wouldn't be able to get higher than a 2 on that essay if you misread it. All right. So that's kind of like the really high range, and then the kind of lower range. We're gonna read this first one. I'm gonna read the first one out loud to you because it is in cursive, and I have found that there's different reading speeds for cursive that can throw us. So I'm going to try. I'm not always the best handwriting, reader out loud, but as I am reading, you are playing teacher. You are the teacher, and I want you to be really generous with your comments. And by generous, I don't mean nice necessarily. I mean, pretend that the student is somebody that is sitting in your class and you're going to have to hand this back to them. And what I want you to pretend is that you are the teacher who, like, for whatever reason, your job is on the line. And if you get a high pass rate this year, you get to keep your job. And in fact, you get a raise for your job. And if you get a low pass rate on the AP test, you're going to lose your job and live in, destitution. You're losing your house, you're losing your kids, you're losing everything if they don't pass this test. Luckily, this scenario is never happened. But let's pretend it's that, because I want you to have like really high stakes in making sure that each of these essays succeed. So you want to point out to them what they are doing right, because you want them to continue doing that behavior. And you want to point out to them what they could improve so that, that pass rate goes up and you get to keep your kids. All right. I haven't used that scenario before. That's fun. Okay, so commenting to the side, but I'm going to give you some time afterwards to give lots of comments. There is always an intense adventure in exploring, thank you, exploring the unknown. It is mysterious, foreign, and immense. Derek Walcott, for example, in his poem 15, provides a compelling account of a boy's adventure to visit an elderly female storyteller in the Caribbean. Although the poem is about hearing these parables from this wise woman, the significance of the experience lies in how the speaker approaches the adventure, going to the storyteller and actually listening, and how it brings him closer to his brother, the indivisible twin, and to nature as well. On his trek to originally locate this woman's abode, that's fun, the speaker relies on heavy plant imagery to set the luscious scene. He details plants like dasheen leaves, yam vines, moss, and mimosa. Part of the deeper meaning of this boy's adventure is the thrill of independence and danger. He is one among the plants, avoiding the threat of personified sunset. He revels in the jungle, frankly, by pointing out how the dusty road on which he travels resembles an old snake through a simile, and remarking that the path has a black twist like an animal. Walcott also cleverly employs slant rhymes to create a lyrical rhythm for the poem. While this metric style alludes to the folk stories the old woman tells, the rhymes are not particularly strict, lending itself to the open, adventurous quality of the poem. Examples of this include skin, begin, path, aftermath, tins, origins, voice, boys, etc. Adventure is also rife in childhood when one is not burdened by responsibility. There is a sharp delineation between childhood and childhood's aftermath in the poem. Adulthood is characterized by the absence of childhood, thereby alerting the reader that the explorative tendencies of a child, somewhat lost to adults, are crucial. The speaker recalls this experience with apt detail and describes the woman's story as ethereal. Almost, she tells the story as a song to the sound of the pipe. The cultural references in the poem to native Caribbean names and plants such as dasheen, tea marie, and cinnamon not only play into the oratory culture of the Caribbean, but also to the vital importance of this memory, this sense of recklessness, adventure, and independence. The speaker is excited to bathe in the woman's lone lamplight instead of sharing the sunlight with others. This adventure is one catered to all the senses. Although the woman is telling a story, what do you think that says? Looks like sin rolling to me. What was it?
I said sin rolling.
Oh, it's story, parentheses, involving hearing, obviously, and sight, in parentheses.
Oh.
The speaker notices fragrant origins that implicate smell as well. The speaker uses adventure then to finally connect with his brother, because they and they alone share this experience together, joined in one shadow. Thus, Walcott provides a mesmerizing description of a young boy's adventure visiting a woman. The speaker reminisces about the cultural roots, the beautiful nature, and his eventual connection with his sibling. This is the significance of Walcott's poem, remembering adventure, love, and independence as a harbinger of a connection to both family and nature. Okay, hopefully that was helpful to read it out loud. I stumbled a few times, but you are now the teacher, giving them lots of comments to decide what did they do well, what do they need to improve, and then at the very bottom, give them a score out of 9. 9 being like, this is so amazing. You finished this in 40 minutes, and remember, it's the first draft, but they finished it in 40 minutes, and they provide tons of detail, all the way down to 1, which is generally like 1 sentence or like a picture of a dasheen leaf, like that would be a 1. 1 is like they didn't even try. So see if you can give them a score. All right, I'm going to give you, it takes me usually about 7 minutes per essay when I'm going through these timed essays. I'm a speedy one though, so I'm going to give you 10 minutes to give them tons of comments on this. If you want to feel the real power of being a teacher, you can use a red pen. Yeah, there we go. Let me see if I have some. Lots. Does anyone want to feel the power? Right here, if you decide, feels good. Crossing stuff out and saying no to the side.
So I think independent.
Really? He didn't describe being independent.
Okay, let's talk together about this one. So it is a really strong essay. Tell me about what are some of the things in this essay that do work really well. Grace? Yes. Yes, look at, especially when it's talking about like the plant imagery and how much they look at gushing leaves, yam vines, moss, mimosa, old snake, black twist. Like they're looking at all of these different ways that it's kind of like it's creating a tone and an atmosphere to the setting, and that it's creating this like idea that they're like entering into nature and becoming like a part of nature. And so it's like they're one among the plants, you know. I think that they're really good at that, and they do that again when they're talking about the senses and talking about the light and the smells and all of that. Yeah, Kale.
I really enjoy the references, like pointing out things that relate to the Caribbean, the name especially. Don't remember exactly how much it contributed to the actual point of the essay, but I do think that's an important thing to do in essays, is to find those connections from outside sources.
Yes, and I think that this person does so well with that because they talk about it being a part of the oratory culture of the Caribbean. Like that is a really smart point that we didn't bring up last time in class. And so that one, and I didn't remember that this essay talks about it, or I would have stole it. That's a really cool point that they're making about like how this has like cultural significance to him too, and that is what is lasting into his adulthood. And I agree that this writer does not necessarily tie that in super closely into a theme, which might be kind of missing from this essay, but it does say it's vitally important to this memory, a sense of recklessness, adventure, and independence. And so it's like a way that he is developing his identity and relationship to his culture. That's a really strong point to make here. And again, finding those patterns in it. It's not just one thing. It's not just the dasheen leaves that are Caribbean. It's the tea marie, it's the sidene, it's all of that. Okay, anything else that this essay does that's very successful? Yeah, Christine? Yes, so much. Did you have an example of that? Because I like luscious scene, but do you have any others? Right. I totally agree. I think that it really works well when they point out the poetic devices that we've been talking about. So that's part of the vocabulary that works, like slant rhymes, lyrical rhythm, metrical style. Like they're showing a kind of sense of maturity about that language and like showing that they can use it well. But I'm trying to find, there were a couple of the words that they chose to describe kind of the tone of it that I was like, that's awesome. Does anyone have an example? Explorative tendencies, that one's nice. Burdened by responsibility.
This is quite eloquent.
Apt. Yeah, I think apt kind of rubs me the wrong way. I'm like, I don't like that. What I don't like about it, and that's not a dig against this essay, this would not hurt them because it's just a personal sort of annoyance, but I don't like when student writers are like congratulating the professional poet. So I don't like when they're like, he's doing such a good job. These are apt details, you know, like, of course it is. He's a professional poet. Like he's very good, you know, but anyway, that's just like a small thing. They are not going to hold that against you. Anyway, harbinger, that was a good one, like that it's a harbinger of connection to both family and nature. Like there's all sorts of words in this that like show that sophistication of vocabulary. Yeah. Any other things that this essay is doing well? Yeah.
I think this person is quite eloquent. Like we were talking about the language choice, but when I first initially read the poem, I was like 9 out of 9. This was fantastic. But like, because it initially at first it's like, oh, they have so many details, they're making references to things,
right?
And it seems like they kind of have an idea where this essay was supposed to go, but
yes,
in the end it's kind of a long flower.
Okay, so maybe some of it does not go the distance that we want it to go in terms of connecting the meaning with the patterns. But I think you are right. Like on our new grading point scale, there is 1 point for sophistication. And it's this way that like, it's this sort of, nebulous point that you get if it sounds good, if it's a good essay, you know, if it's sophisticated. And this essay would get that point for sure.
2 points for it.
Well, you only have one option, but maybe it'll like make up for any sort of shortcomings in the essay. So is there anything that this essay could improve on as the teacher? What would you say? Yeah, sure.
Their thesis doesn't really state much of an argument. They don't really ever try to convince us of anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's like this way that it's coming. He says that it's the story is bringing him closer to his brother and nature as well, but this is more of a description of like what is the plot of the poem, like what is happening in the poem, rather than maybe an argument. Yeah, Christian.
Well, the poetic analysis is there, and so is like the ethics, but finding it.
I agree. Yeah, like I feel like in every paragraph there needs to be 1 or 2 more sentences that ties it all together into a kind of like cohesive argument. So what score did you give this one? Let's start with 9. Does anyone give it 9? Awesome. Anyone give it an 8? I would give it an 8. Anyone give it a 7? All right, cool. Kale, what'd you give it?
Oh, I changed it to a 7.
Okay, but not lower. No one's lower than a 7, right? Yeah, this is definitely a high scoring essay. Okay, I do have the answers to what they got, but don't skip ahead. We're gonna look at the next essay now. Okay, this one's not in cursive, but I'll read it to you anyway.
Oh, thank you.
Derek Walcott relives his childhood experience of visiting an elderly woman storyteller with his brother in the jungles of the Caribbean in his poem 14. Walcott uses extreme detail and poetic devices to intensify the reader's experience and convey how special this experience was to him and his brother. This experience was clearly significant to the pair, as Walcott sets a magical portrait that best describes the wonders and amazement of young boys as they immerse themselves in the journey to the storyteller's house and the stories themselves. Walcott uses devices such as diction, naturalistic imagery, personification, and metaphor to portray the significance of this magical experience to himself and his brother. Walcott's diction is key in setting a tone of awe and amazement as he, key in setting a tone of awe and amazement as he kicks off the poem with descriptive language. He kicks off the poem. He begins with writing with the frenzy of an old snake shedding its skin, the speckled road scored with breath, smelling of mold. The alliteration of the S consonant gives the reader the shivers as if they themselves are embarking on such a journey. The diction helps to create this imagery as smells and touch senses, such as the speckled road and bumpy ruts, are mentioned. Walcott's attention to detail demonstrates his attachment to the area where the folk stories begin. It is as though the thickness of the trees marks the beginning of his place apart, where he can immerse himself in the magic of the stories. Walcott continues this imagery as the sun sets and he arrives to the storyteller's house. Walcott writes that the shutters closing like the eyelids of that mimosa, this simile suggests a separation in mood between the day and night. While to some the night is for rest, it is a time of excitement for Walcott as he gets to hear the stories. The imagery and repetition of the light of the lamps that guides the pair to the house juxtaposes the night surrounding them. While children are normally scared of the dark because of their innocence, it is almost inviting for Walcott, making this a memorable childhood experience for him. Walcott's use of metaphor and personification emphasize the importance of this experience to the children. Because of their natural innocence, they glorify the journey and the storyteller's adventures. This magic sticks with Walcott as he recalls that in the gully of her voice, shadows stood up and walked. Her voice travels my shelves. She was the lamplight in the stare of the two mesmerized boys, still joined in one shadow, indivisible twins. This personification of the shadows demonstrates how the stories come alive to Walcott and his brother, to Walcott and his brother and him were completely immersed in the worlds they described. The experience was so magical to the pair that they are now indivisible, which is the most significant aspect of the journey, the inseparable bond that came as a result. Walcott's use of poetry devices such as sensory diction, naturalistic imagery, personification, and metaphor all work together to convey the experience of the storyteller and the lasting effects it had on Walcott's memory and his relationship with his brother. These devices immerse the reader in Walcott's recollection. It is almost as if Walcott himself takes on the role of the magnificent storyteller, leaving the reader with the memory of a magical experience. To leave the reader with the memory of magical experience. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit shorter time this time. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. So as the teacher, you're in a huge rush. You got to get home to your kids. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to set the stage again. But if you are in a huge rush and you only have 5 minutes, it means that you have to prioritize which comments you give them. So give them at least one good comment and then prioritize and give them a couple comments on things that really could be improved. If they only can improve a couple things, what could they improve? Okay, tell me about what this essay does well. Asher?
It's very direct in its like thing. When it says in the very beginning that uses the extreme detail to intensify experience and convey how special the experience was.
Yeah.
Throughout the essay, he only talks about that, and that's really good.
Okay, good. Good. So it's like you can see this really clear through line from his thesis statement all the way till the end, where it's this experience was special, it was immersive, it was magical, right? And that continues through the whole essay. So it has some cohesion there. Yeah,
I like how he provides good, stable evidence to support the thesis.
okay, good.
The
Can you give
last-
me an example?
I don't know, just like all the quotes and like then his analysis of the quotes.
Okay, good.
He has a lot of quotes. With the frenzy of a snake shedding its skin, the speckled roller scored with ruts smelling of blood.
Mhm.
The alliteration of the S consonants gives the reader shivers as if they themselves are working on such a journey. So
Yeah.
he definitely mentions like how he was going to analyze the language of the poem, and he does that.
Yes. Okay, good. What else does this essay do well, Race? Yes, so like Walcott continues this imagery. Walcott's use of metaphor and personification emphasize the importance of this experience to the children. Like every time there's a topic sentence here, it's referencing what came before and then moving us into the next idea, which is hard to do with the thesis that they have set up, because the thesis they set up looks like it's going to be list-like, but the essay doesn't feel like a list when you read it. And the way that they're moving through the poem, I think works well too. Christiane?
So in their thesis, they say diction, which is like words, but
Right.
they don't talk about it as if that's what it is.
Yes. Right. Wait, were you going to say more? Sorry.
Well, not really. They talk about how the word rather than just use of the word.
Right. It's not like, because, I have an issue with that when people say somebody uses diction in a piece of writing, that just means they use words, and of course they do, it's a piece of writing. But the way that they're talking about it is actually talking about tone, and they're actually talking about consonants. And so it was okay to me that they used that word in the thesis, because that's one time that you kind of like use it vaguely. You go on to be way more specific about what you mean. So I liked that too. Okay, what could this essay do to improve? Grace? Yeah, what seemed like non-specific to you about their thesis? Yeah, I think so too. I think that the essay comes across as really repetitive because of the vagueness of their thesis. So their thesis is kind of a repetition of what the prompt said. The prompt says, explain the significance of the experience, and then their thesis is the experience is significant. And so they're not like being clear enough right up front about what that significance is. And as a result, they have all of these amazing observations about what the language does specifically, that it creates shivers, that it creates a world apart, that it's a juxtaposition between night and day. Like their individual observations about each piece of evidence is really great, but it doesn't add up to something that is I want to use the word significant. They're not telling me what that significance adds up to, you know, Christiane?
They had good ideas, but they really didn't.
Yeah.
And they used quotes a lot. There's nothing wrong with that, but in the last paragraph, they had a quote that was like 4 lines long, but that's
Right.
too long.
Right. You can cut that down, and if they're only wanting to talk about the personification of the shadows, they could have just used that phrase like shadows stood up and walked instead of the entire last part. And so sometimes it feels like they want the quotes to do the analytical work for them. They're using these long quotes to like stay, the magic sticks with Walcott. Okay, I'll use this long quote, but then they only talk about the personification of the story, and they're not talking about like why this would be something that stuck with him then. Yeah, Ethan. Yes.
Like on page 2, he says, he's talking about how the stuff was on for Walcott, and it just says it was, he doesn't really go through.
Right. Whereas the other story is talking about like how, oh, it provides a cultural significance, or the other essay, it provides a cultural significance to him that will last into his adulthood and creates this like bond between him, his culture, and nature. This person says it was inviting. And that is true about the tone, but it doesn't take that extra step. I always appreciate a sports metaphor. So yeah, I think that this is a really strong essay, and I think if they were to take another draft at this, they could make it really, really good. But in the 40 minutes that they had, they just didn't have that chance to make it all gel together the way that we want it to. So what score did you give this one? How many people give this one a 9? An 8? A 7? A 6? 5? Anyone lower than 5? Okay, good. Yeah. All right, cool. So I think the other one was stronger, even though it was shorter, and maybe they didn't have as many cool things to say about like the actual sound of the words, or you know, there were some things in the second essay that were stronger. Overall, it was the first essay was a stronger essay. Let's look at the last essay. I'll tell you, this is the low scoring essay. Has nothing to do with the handwriting. I don't want you to think that just because the handwriting is messy here, it's not that bad. But the first one has nice handwriting, but it's just and it has nothing to do with the length either. You'll see why. All right, Derek Walcott's. Did I press record? Yes. Derek Walcott's 14 poem describes the experience of visiting a storyteller woman as a child. Walcott's use of several poetic devices portray a memorable and mysterious experience, one that has remained significant to him throughout his life. One of the more immediately apparent is the use of sensory explanations. Smells of mossy walls, the visuals of lamplight exposing the ribs of the houses, the sounds of water sloshing inside the kerosene lamps all depict a mass of unique sensory experiences. Combined together, they portray a very unique experience most would remember. This emphasizes its significance by the fact that he can remember vividly these events and details. Thus, it must have been an amazing experience. Another less obvious but more significant aspect of the poem is the personification of the location of the experience. Walcott goes far beyond, thank you, saw those 2 words, far beyond and simply describe being the village. Each aspect of the village suggests that they are less walking into a village and more into a person themselves. The shutters are like eyelids, the road, the back, ribs glowing with light, and finally the woman herself. The woman's physical characteristics are left out intentionally. Instead, she moves around the room as if passing through her own shadow, whereas she is the shadow. The voice is magnificent, like a gully, and her experience is magnificent. Yet she remains almost unseen. Walcott seems to say that the event was as significant as exploring into someone else's, that says, soul. Oh yeah, of course, thank you. The gravity and significance of the idea convey the significance of this experience to him. Derek Walcott's 14 delves into his experience with the storyteller. The allusions to experiencing someone else's soul and the sensory and vivid description suggest this must have been truly a significant life experience. Okay, for this one, I don't even need you to write comments. Why don't you just talk to each other about what this one does well and what it could improve?
Too bad. I
It's
already
not a
wrote
disaster, but it does something well,
comments.
something well.
In the beginning, his head is
Yeah.
basically the same.
Super short.
I don't think it's much problem. That in like.
Because he doesn't exactly touch on much of the thesis. What also really annoys me how he says the sounds of water sloshing inside the kerosene lamps. Just because it shows that he doesn't quite understand what's happening. So,
Felt like he read the poem once or twice, and then
and like the imagery of like how the place is the body, like never says the road is back. The shutters like eyelids, it says horns, and the ribs are just the place. The ribs are the lantern.
he also mentions a village. There is no village. He also mentions a room. There is no reference in the poem. There is a house.
He also doesn't see
He does not, and also his description of the while very
he doesn't say anything. He does do well like with the pieces kind of, and he says a lot of things.
He says, combined together, they portray a very unique experience in both. This emphasizes its significance by the fact that we can remember these significance and details.
He says it's a poem, so it's significant. That's not
Thus, it must have been an amazing
like
experience.
combined together, they portray a very unique experience that one most would remember. That's conjecture.
I find it kind of funny that he basically says the same thing.
It's not something that makes sense.
Like clearly memory is significant. He mentions
Your voice is magnificent, and your appearance is also magnificent. And he never says that she's a singer.
yeah. Also, like, where does he get the
He
metaphor from?
misunderstood the shadow. Like the shadow's not supposed to be obscuring anything. The shadow will bring the thing.
I just think that he didn't read the poem.
It's possible he did this one last season.
That's true. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting. He's just really bad. What would you give this one?
What's the one that you have to give if they don't quote anything?
Or where they go off on a random tangent like they hadn't actually been involved. I'd say even at 2 or 3.
Because the two has to be like especially bad.
Like
Yeah.
I mean, he had to be serious.
All right, give it a score.
So it does not.
Yeah. He does mention that.
All right, what'd you give this one? Gut reaction, just give it a number.
3.
3 or 4. Okay,
Four.
good. I think that's about right. For this one, it's probably going to be more like a 3 because he's misunderstanding the poem in some key places, like the part about the shadows and thinking that the woman is walking around the room so that she becomes the shadow. I think that's taking it in a direction that I don't think the poem is taking it, right? The poem is saying that like the kids are sitting within the shadow and the walking of the shadows is like the stories like coming to life. You know, it's not the woman walking around the room. So with those kind of like misinterpretations that he has, or like I think the kerosene sloshing, right? Anyway, there's a couple that it'd be tough to get higher, even though this writer is doing a couple good things here where they are trying to connect the poetic like devices, the imagery itself, and finding these patterns and trying to connect that to this idea of significance. Like I do like that they find the pattern with the personification, like shutters or eyelids, roads, the back of a snake, ribs glowing with light. Like that's cool, but it's not quite taking it to any sort of meaningful place. Okay, the scores are on the next page. So the first essay, okay, before you look at the scores, you're gonna see that I'm a bit of a harsh grader when it comes to these. Sometimes I'm usually guessing like one below on these, especially when they're on the high end. So turn the page and you can see that. 1A gets a 9. So the first one got a 9, the second one got a 6, which you guys were spot on with that one. And then this last one, yeah, it gets a 3. So 9, 6, and 3. We've got the really high end. The 6 is, in the middle, but still pretty high. And then the 3 is on the low end. You guys, in the writing that you guys are writing, like this doesn't transfer to our grading scale, but all of you guys are writing better essays than the 3. I haven't seen, even from the very first timed essay that you did, I haven't seen much that are like down in this range. For the most part, we've been sort of in the middle range with a couple essays where I'm like, they did this in 40 minutes, got to check the timestamp and make sure. And yes, you did, you didn't cheat. And so they're the high range essays. You're doing great. Yeah.
I personally like the second one better than the first
You
one.
did. Why?
I think the second one, although it may not have been as like densely written, it had a lot of evidence that actually tied into its thesis. And I don't think the first one even really mentioned a thesis in its introduction paragraph.
Yeah. Let's look at the first one again at the thesis part. So it says, although the poem is about hearing these parables from this wise woman, the significance of this experience lies in how the speaker approaches the adventure, going to the storyteller and actually listening, and how it brings him closer to his brother, the indivisible twin, and to nature as well. So it's not as direct as here is how the poem is creating this theme, which is what I have been teaching you to do, right? And part of the reason I'm teaching you to do that is because I don't want you to leave anything out. But this poem, this writer does have this idea that listening to the story brings him closer to his brother and to nature. And then by the time we get to the end, he's clearer about that being a thematic thing. And he says it provides mesmerizing description of a young boy's adventure visiting a woman. The speaker reminisces about his cultural roots, the beautiful nature, and his eventual connection with his sibling. This is the significance of Walcott's poem, remembering adventure, love, and independence as a harbinger of a connection to both family and nature. So he does get to that theme at the very end and gets more specific with it. And if your thesis isn't in the first paragraph, that's okay. They're just looking for it somewhere. And so if you eventually do get to it, you do end up getting that kind of like point. I don't personally like it, but they do let you kind of do it that way. And I think the reason, and you can read the description for why they gave that one such a high score, but I think the reason is that all of their observations were tied in with this idea that it creates a connection between speaker, nature, and thus to like family and culture, and it's kind of talking about how the brother is like this idea of like family and culture and being tied to your roots. And so because of that, they really like the sophistication of it. I would have given that one an 8, but the reason the second essay is not as strong is because even though it stays consistent about the thesis isn't as interesting as we would want it to be. Like it's just the thesis is a lot of times just it's magical, it's significant, but it's not adding to my understanding of the poem in any way. So a 6 on this 9-point scale was still a really good score. In my class, 6 was full points on this scale. So it was like you're at the top range, but it just wasn't quite as like interesting to read as the 9. So they're giving a lot for interesting in this one. But structure-wise, I agree with you. But structure-wise, I like the second one better.
Yeah. I don't know. I have like in my head, I write essays based off like a certain pattern.
Yes.
I have a way I write them.
And that's
So,
good. I don't want to get you away from that just because this essay it scored a little bit lower than the other one, because I think the structure is good. If you can combine interesting with good structure, then you're like a 9 for sure. No debate.
That's what I gotta work on. Making it interesting.
I don't think you have to work on that. I think you're doing well. I mean, yes, we can all work on that over and over again, but I don't think it's a weak point. There we go.
How hard can I stretch?
Well, okay. When I was reading your Emily Dickinson poems, there were some stretches. They were fun to read because of these stretches where I was just like, how did they come up with this? Was it someone in this class that was talking about how death looked, well, death looks like a coffin, or one of the words they were talking about how the word looks like a coffin. Was that in this class? Oh, it was amazing. And I can't remember exactly what word it was because it was like, no, it doesn't, but still a super cool idea. So when you were stretching, I wrote to the side on the comments, I was like, okay, this is a stretch. You're stretching quite far, and I like the stretch you're doing for this assignment. But when it comes to writing the essays, we want on the test, we want to like scale the stretch back. The stretch was to show you just how much you can say about something, but now we want to take it back to like, what can we actually prove through patterns to say about something, you know? But I really enjoyed reading those. Someone had a really good, I want to say it was Sydney, a mathematical thing about like who was it? Was it Christiane? I can't remember. It was about the stresses, the syllables adding up. So one was 5, and then one was 4, and then one was 3 to create this like descending pattern of words. Okay, no, but they were looking at like immortality, another word, and eternity, and how it was like going down in syllables. And I was like, this is getting like crazy. Like I imagine them having like a board in their house with like yarn, like tying things together, like when people go nuts. Yeah. Pepe Sylvia. Anyway, okay. So let's get a little bit of vocabulary done at the end of class. That's some poem formats.
She gets happy.
Okay, we're gonna skip sonnets, English sonnet, Italian sonnet. I know you did the prompt about it. Also, for those of you who wrote sonnets, did anyone here write a sonnet for theirs? That's right. Yeah, Amy did. You know, write a sonnet for theirs. Anyway, the extra points for that goes into the October prompt score, which today's prompt for you guys was the last prompt that goes on this quarter's grade. So you'll get one more score. I think it's for 30 points for October's prompts. And you'll see extra credit on that if you did the sonnet. But anyway, I really liked seeing those. Those were awesome. The people who did them put them. Wait, you did one, didn't you, Gil? Huh? You did a sonnet.
No, I did not. I considered it. I was like, do I have time to write this? Because I tend to do all of these prompts during my seminar.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty fun.
Maybe it was Sammy. Anyway, like people did it in iambic pentameter. It's really cool. You can go and see it on the list. They're all open to you, you know. Anyway, we're gonna skip sonnet, and I'm gonna tell you about a couple of the other forms. So look at prose poem. Prose poem is what it sounds like. It's a piece of writing in prose that has obvious poetic qualities. Piece of writing in prose with obvious poetic qualities. The very first poems that you wrote for this unit, or that you wrote about for this unit, one of them was a prose poem. I don't know if you remember, it was called Bath by, I want to say, Amy Lowell.
Oh.
Yeah, Wobble Deliciously. That's right. That one's a
Cut it out of
prose
my
poem.
mind.
So it's a piece of writing in prose having obvious poetic qualities. There's another one in your packet. It's in the purple pages. We don't really get to the purple pages in this class, but it's in the second to last purple page. And it's called Ways of Rebelling. I'll just read this to you really quickly. We're not going to discuss it, but as an example. So it says, who needs to be at peace in the world? It helps to be between wars, to die a few times each day, to understand your father's sky as you take it apart piece by piece and can't feel anything. Can't feel the tree growing under your feet, the eyes poking night only to find another night to compare it to. Who ever heard of turning pain into hummingbirds or redbirds? Haven't we grown? What does it mean to be older? Maybe a house without doors can still survive a storm. Maybe I can't find the proper way to rebel, or damn it, I can't leave. I want to, but you grow inside of me. And as I watch you, before I know it, I'm too heavy, too full of you to move. Maybe that's what they meant when they said you shouldn't love a country too much. So I know it looks like it's cut off here, but this is just how Poetry Foundation does it. This is like written like a paragraph. They're not making any spaces for end lines. So it has obvious poetic qualities. We'd have to do some real digging to figure out what it means. It's a poem about patriotism and why we are patriotic, even when it hurts to be patriotic and even when we have criticisms. But it's doing this through metaphors and similes and assonance, consonants, and so on. So this is a prose poem. All right, back to the definitions. Dramatic poetry. Dramatic poetry is poetry in a play. So it's like in dialogues or monologues, poetry in a play. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of trouble and by opposing end them to die, to sleep no more. That'd be an example of dramatic poetry. Not everything in Shakespeare would be called dramatic poetry because it's not all written as poetry. When you read Shakespeare, you'll notice some of it is written as prose, and then some of it has this kind of metrical unit to it, and some of it's poetry. So when you find the poetry in the Shakespeare, that would be called a dramatic poem. Okay, elegy. Elegy is a poem of serious reflection, usually for the dead. Almost always. I don't think people use that word elegy unless they're talking about it being for the dead.
Wait, what's that? It's eulogy. right?
Eulogy, yeah, but it sounds like eulogy, so it'll help you remember it.
Right.
Yeah, elegy. So Whitman has a beautiful elegy. Let me just read to you the first part. It says, so it's called When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed, and the great star early drooped in the western sky in the night, I mourned, and yet shall mourn with ever returning spring. Ever returning spring, Trinity sure to me you bring, lilac blooming perennial and drooping star in the west, and thought of him I love. It's such a beautiful poem. Whitman, really early example of an artist who was openly gay. Like I want to say like 1860s was when he was publishing in America. And yeah, he's writing a poem that says, and thought of him I love. Pretty cool. All right, so that's elegy. Epic. Epic is a long verse used to tell of heroic deeds. Long verse used to tell of heroic deeds. I took an entire class that tried to define exactly what an epic was. So there's lots of different characteristics to it. This class said there really are only 3 real epics, and the rest are just like not actually epics. My teacher was saying that really an epic can't have any kind of interiority. It can just be about the deeds, and it can't be someone reflecting on like what those deeds meant to them. So it's almost like the characters are just like very surface. So the Odyssey and the Iliad, and they said Ovid, and other than that, no. Other people will argue that the Inferno and Paradiso and all of those, that those are epics. What's it called? Divine Comedy, thank you. Yeah, that's an epic, but epics are old. Anyway, here's a start of an epic. Tell me, O muse, of that ingenious hero who traveled far and wide after he had sacked the famous town of Troy. That's the first line of the Odyssey. Yeah. So it's a story about heroic deeds. It usually follows that like hero's journey. Yeah.
So did they think the Epic of Gilgamesh wasn't an epic?
No, you know what? We only did Western epics in that class. So yeah, I think he would call that one an epic though, because that one, yeah, you don't really get into interiority of Gilgamesh. It's just like Gilgamesh did this, and Gilgamesh slept with this lady, and this lady, and this lady. And that poem's dirty. Okay. All right, a lyric. A lyric is a poem that expresses personal emotions in first person. A poem that expresses personal emotions in first person. I'm no expert on modern music, but I would guess that Olivia Rodrigo's poems are all lyrics. Right? Talking about how she feels about that boy. Maybe Ariana Grande is all lyrics too. Let me show you an example of a lyric though that's more formal. I feel like when I was in high school, I only wrote lyrics because I just wanted to think about how I felt. But if you go to the gray pages and you see this poem called Sympathy, I'll just read you the first stanza. If you want to just listen, it's fine. I know what the caged bird feels, alas, when the sun is bright on the upland slopes, when the wind stirs soft through the springing grass and the river flows like a stream of glass, when the first bird sings and the first bud opes and the faint perfume from its chalice steals. I know what the caged bird feels. And then I'm gonna skip down to the last stanza. I know why the caged bird sings on me when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and he would be free. It's not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. So it's kind of disguised as him thinking about someone else's feelings, the bird, but he's talking about himself and how he feels being a caged bird. This is by Paul Laurence Dunbar. He's the same one that we had a poem up here that was purple called like I Wear the Mask, if you remember that one. Same poet. So he's talking about being African-American in the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, so that's a lyric. Apostrophe. Do I want to do apostrophe? Yes, okay. Apostrophe is when a speaker directly addresses someone or something that can't answer back. When a speaker directly addresses someone or something that can't answer back. So this could be a kind of personification. Like, for example, let me actually say the definition one more time. Speaker addresses someone or something that isn't present or can't answer back. Sorry, can't answer back, that's what I said. So it can be personification. So like a really famous example of apostrophe is this poem called Death Be Not Proud. Death be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. The poet is like directly addressing death. So it kind of personifies death and he's talking to death, you know? There's a poem where the woman is talking to her own poem. That's like my ill-begotten, ill-formed child or something. And she's talking about how bad her own poem is. And she's directly addressing it. It could be to a person. There's another one, to my dear and loving husband. But in the poem, the husband is not a character who is answering back. We could still call that an apostrophe. So it could be directly addressing a person, but it's not a dialogue. So it's somebody who's like not there as they are addressing them. Does that make sense? So it doesn't have, when I say can't answer back, the reason it can't answer back might be because it's like a thing and can't talk, but it also might just be because that thing is not, that person is not represented in the poem. So the best way to remember it is just a direct address, an apostrophe. And it's fun that it has the same name as apostrophes, right? Not confusing at all. All right, a refrain. A refrain is a verse or a line that repeats at regular intervals. Verse or line that repeats at regular intervals. So, you know, in a song, basically the chorus of the song. Born in the USA, I was born in the USA, born in the USA, I was born in the USA. That would be a refrain. Let me show you another one. We're going to look at this poem in more detail, I think, next time. So go to the gray pages and I'll just read this to finish up class. Oh, because I love to finish up class with death and sadness. So this will be perfect. Do not go gentle into that good night. This is a poem about the poet's father dying. So again, perfect way to go into your day. It's a gorgeous poem. Okay, sometimes I get a little shaky reading this poem because I just think it is just beautiful. Look at this, look at the way that the refrains work in this. It's right before the sonnets. Sorry, that helps.
Could you repeat the title?
Do not go gentle into that good night. Okay, I'm gonna read. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words have forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in the green bay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late they breathed it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Brave men, near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So there's two refrains there. What are the lines that are refrains? Remy? Yes, that line's repeating over and over again, so that's a refrain. And then Audrey? Yeah, exactly. Do not go gentle into that good night is repeating over and over again. This is a specific kind of poem called a Villanelle that has like so many rules in the way that you use the refrains and the way that you separate it and structure it. So we're gonna start next time. Oh, well, after fall break, we will start with this poem. Friday, you don't have homework, but I do see you Friday. We're going to do a timed essay in class. So come to class and then we won't have to do that on your own. But then over fall break, there isn't really any other homework except for doing your daily prompt. So just a heads up. All right, I'll see you later.